Hello everyone and welcome back to English with Kayleigh. In today's video we're going to analyse another one of Jackie Kay's poems entitled Going to See King Lear. And just before we get started, I've actually created a resource for teaching and studying this poem. You can find the link in the description or head to my Teachers Pay Teachers account, which is All Things High School. Okay, so first we're going to read the poem and then we're going to discuss the themes and the collection in which this poem was first published before we get into a stanza by stanza analysis. So let's read Going to See King Lear. On the big red smooth seat, I watch the giant television and my mother's eyes greedy, gulping everything down like chocolate raisins. In front of me are rows of heads that put me in such a bad mood. Sleek, shining page boy, snobby at the back. Tight, bossy bun trapped in a net. Tall, selfish beehive blocking my view. Then, all of a sudden, darkness comes down, sweet, and will not melt in the hand or in the mouth. I am sitting with strangers, just the shapes and silhouettes of them now. We breathe in, all of us, in one breath, waiting to be changed, to stop time, or for the trailer to end and King Lear begin. No children, except me, watching with Mum, who leans forward, her body diagonal, her fury at good King Lear's disloyal daughters. She whispers, "Get out," to the good one, or "Don't put up with that." I think it was Cordelia. When the King Lear's Gloucester gets his eyes gouged out, my mother falls off her chair. I cover my eyes. Too late. I've seen it. The terrible tormenting sight of a man's hands over his helpless scooped sockets, staggering back to some other time of trust, while those egg whites of his eyes run. Vile jelly, I shake, appalled. Lear foams, whisked white at the mouth. Jesus, my mother says, shocked. That was good. That was so good. Her eyes glint, green with pleasure. Deep sigh when the names appear and disappear. So slowly she rises from the red seat. I had to see it. I did. What a good, good girl, sitting all quiet. My mouth has fallen open for good. It won't close. I'm 7. I have seen Lear's best friends get his eyes poked out. The red floor is sliding downwards. I will fall into myself years later, grown up, velvet curtains drawn open. So one of Kay's longer poems in the Darling anthology that is tested for the A-level syllabus for Cambridge. So the themes that we see here, most obviously we see themes of childhood and family, in particular this mother and daughter relationship. And then we also see one that actually has a lot of crossover between King Lear and the poem itself, and it is this idea of blindness and insight, so in not understanding something and then starting to understand. So it comes from the collection entitled Other Lovers, which was first published in 1993. It's important to note the collections because it will give you a kind of starting point as to what themes are explored and what was Kay's message within this particular collection. So in Other Lovers, Kay explores the qualities of love in a variety of relationships which are rooted in both the past and the present. And her poems move from the familiar, so the parent, the child and the lover, to the extraordinary. So this is also where we see a sequence on the blues singer Bessie Smith. So of course here we've got this parent and child relationship. So we start to consider what kind of relationship does the persona and the mother have. So let's get into a stanza by stanza analysis, just keeping these questions in the back of our minds. So the first thing that we see is this speech, which really much emphasizes and mimics the speech of a child. The big red, the giant television, bad mood. But we see how this progresses throughout the poem. We start with this very young, simplistic vocabulary, but as it builds to the climax of the play of King Lear and of the experience for the speaker, we start to see their syntax changes. And my mother's eyes greedy. So we have to consider King Lear as a text, because you have to think, okay, why is it that it was this particular play Kay decided to write about? And I think that we see quite a bit of parallel here between the mother and some of the characters of King Lear. In terms of greed, so we see Edmund, and we also see Lear himself. Just this, he wants to maintain and keep all of his powers as king, but without actually having to do the work in passing it on to his daughters. And of course, we see Goneril and Regan, who are incredibly greedy out of the 3 daughters. So. And in this way, the mother here, she doesn't seem to consider the implications of having a young child watch this tragedy, which it is. It's, Shakespeare's probably one of his most famous tragedies. And yet she's taken a child with her, and we learn later that the child is only 7 years old. Put me in such a bad mood. Very hyperbolic language and statements coming from the speaker. In this sense of over-exaggerating, over-emphasizing the emotions, which of course we know is quite common in young people. And we see it in several of Kay's other poems, most notably in Divorce. And that's why I've put it there, because sometimes you have to consider how these poems are characteristic of Kay's works. So, that's something you can mention. Stanza 2 then, the sleek, shining page boy, snobby at the back, the tight, bossy bun. So we have this sibilance here. We see this, this agitation actually from the speaker. It seems to hint at this kind of class divide, in having, these boys appearing very shiny and sleek, and being very snobby. So you could look at this through the social class lens. It's quite a weak connection, but nevertheless one that you could bring in within your analysis. And that agitation continues throughout the second stanza. Trapped in the net, tall, selfish beehive blocking my view. So, here she's alluding to the people, and also suggesting that they are selfish, and that, she can't see past their big heads. But then does this also extend to her mum, when we consider that she is being quite greedy and that she wanted to go to see the production? And it meant that her young child had to go and see it as well. And we see this quite traumatic experience unfold for the speaker, almost unbeknownst to the mother herself. Then, so now we have a volta, a change is coming, but not only in the story, but for the persona themselves. As we know, it's her, herself, how things change for her from this moment on. The darkness comes down sweet and will not melt in the hand or in the mouth. I think that the image returns to the chocolate raisins that are mentioned in the first stanza. We see the mum's eyes greedily gulping things down like chocolate raisins, not taking the time to savour or enjoy. But this time here, it seems like they will not be rapidly swallowed and forgotten. They will remain. So it seems as if this is very much an imprinted memory, and one of great importance to the speaker, that helped to shape her and her identity. So if we consider the stanzas at this point, the poem is made up of 8 stanzas of slowing septets. So it very much reads like a stream of consciousness, and a very important memory. So then we move on to stanza 3, and the persona continues to discuss and to describe the people around her. However, now we start to get this sense of alienation and this sense of blindness. I'm sitting with strangers, just the shapes and silhouettes. She can no longer differentiate or give characters or give people around her this individualized description. And then part of this is that we see that this divide now is no longer present. They're no longer individuals, but they're just a collective group who are there to witness this amazing work of literature, which also links very much to this idea about the power of literature and the power of words, which is something that's explored throughout the poem, and we'll discuss that shortly. To be changed, to stop time. Okay, so this is what I said in terms of this idea of the power of literature and the power of words, especially when we consider the last stanza and the last sentence about how the persona will fall into herself with the curtains drawing open. We get this idea that this person is potentially someone who works in theatre or is a writer, both of which we know is true of Kay. You know, she's a playwright, she's also a novelist and a poet. So here we see this enjambment, no children except me. So this really creates emphasis of the fact that there are no other children. You know, the persona has been, she feels set apart from everyone else her age. With my mum, who leans forward, her body diagonal, we start to see these really strong uses of caesareas just to increase the tension and the visual imagery of seeing the mum, you know, that built up of anger as she moves her body forward. And then we see this very authentic voice, get out to the good one, or don't put up with that. It's quite ironic given that she's taken a 7-year-old to see such works, you know, and she says to Cordelia, you know, don't put up with that, you know, get out of there. Which is, the irony of it is that she has a very young daughter with her, and she's almost, you know, she's making her sit through the play. On the other side though, I mean, she sees the good in Cordelia, and later on she calls her own daughter good later in the poem. So there's a number of layers within the character of the mother that could be explored. So we've got that enjambment. I think it was Cordelia. So this enjambment obviously allows for a pause to remember the name, but it also suggests that this character and her qualities had a lasting impact on the speaker. And then we see the climax of the play and also the climax of the poem. I cover my eyes, too late, I've seen it, the terrible tormenting sight. Here again we've got this vast number of caesareas to reflect the feeling and almost the heartbeat of the speaker and the shock she's experiencing through this quite traumatic event. This is strengthened with the alliteration, the terrible tormenting sight of a man's hands over his helpless scooped sockets. We see this change in pace, again mimicking that heartbeat and how it's intensifying as realization sets in, so this horror and shock of the situation. Scooped sockets staggering back to some other time of trust. So we've got this sibilance which really emphasizes this climatic event, but as I said before, we do see a change in syntax now, moving away from this, you know, big chair, you know, this big seat, the big cinema, and now we're developing a more mature voice from the persona. So it shows us her growth and her insight and her understanding and how much she grows from experiencing such events. Some other time of trust. Is this in reference to Gloucester trying to, you know, remove himself from the situation, or is it actually the persona in wanting to escape from it and trying to get out of this situation, to move herself away from this traumatic event? Vile jelly, I shake appalled. So this is a direct quote from King Lear, and Cornwall says this as he gouges out Gloucester's second eye. So it really adds to the brutality of the event. But there's an extra layer. It's not just about the persona repeating what she's heard on the screen, what she's experienced, but it's also her own perspective of the scene and of the evening in its entirety and what she's witnessed. So we just see just how impactful it was for her. That was good. That was so good. And of course, this juxtaposes with the girl's experience and feelings. The mother is utterly in awe. She thinks it's wonderful. But again, what we have to notice is that she fails to notice and fails to acknowledge her daughter's response to the play, and doesn't seem to comfort her. She does seem very greedy, as if she's there for herself. And this is emphasised by the use of italics as well, which Kay does pretty frequently throughout the collection. Moving on to the last two stanzas, her eyes glint green with pleasure. So again, we've got this reference back to stanza 1, these connotations of green being very greedy and selfish, very much there for her own satisfaction. And the persona says, I had to see it. I did. And I think this is that key moment where we move from blindness into insight, and that, you know, she's learnt lessons about life through experiencing the play and the evening as a whole. What a good girl, sitting all quiet. Again, the mother just seems oblivious to the feelings of her daughter, but then she also labels her as good, just like Cordelia. So again, looking at those layers, those complex layers of parenthood and of parental relationships. My mouth has fallen open for good. Again, we've got this enjambment, this stream of consciousness, this important memory that the persona wants to share. It won't close. This could reference, of course, her shock within the moment, but it could also reference speech in how she's grown, and how she will start to form her own opinions and her own choices, perhaps becoming more vocal. I am 7, and I think this is quite a shocking statement for the reader, because it's not until the very last stanza that we actually understand just how young you know, the persona is and was when she experienced the play. I will fall into myself years later, grown up, velvet curtains drawn open. We get this wonderful sense of the speaker saying that she will fall into her character. So this could obviously mean her own character in her own identity, but then it could also allude to a job or profession, perhaps about a performer or writer, which obviously goes back to the insight and the power of literature, which I think is an important message from Kay in this particular poem. So to finish up, if we consider the form, the speaker, and AO5 for going to see King Lear. So the form, we have 8 stanzas of slowing septets, reflects this very reminiscent experience of the speaker, and also this, you know, remembering this traumatic event and just almost, you know, getting everything out in one go. So the speaker, we have a female persona written using the present simple tense, which makes the story very imminent and impactful. It is factual, and it emphasizes how impactful the memory was for the speaker. In terms of AO5, I would suggest looking at David Paddy and identity theory and thinking about how identity is constructed through social situations and social events. And you could also possibly touch upon social class theory. There's a weak connection there, but if you did have an essay on social class and you wanted to use it as supporting evidence, I think this would be an excellent one to use. So guys, I hope this video has helped you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!